Well, hello and welcome to another live Tech Talk. I'm super excited today to have you guys all here. You probably just watched us maybe 30 minutes ago or so, where we did Infinispan and Redis, because Oliver here on the chat says it was okay. You know, Oliver, for us Americans, okay means it wasn't that great. Hopefully you thought it was way better than okay during that session. We had a great time in that session, but now we're switching gears and having a new session where Jan is going to walk us through all the key differentiators with OpenShift. So if you're a developer interested in OpenShift and how would you engage OpenShift over and above raw Kubernetes, that's what we're about to show you now. It's going to be a lot of fun. Jan is one of our resident experts on this. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Jan, let her introduce herself, and then she can do her screen share. Over to you.
All right, thanks, Burr. So I'm Jan Kleinert. I lead a team of OpenShift developer advocates here at Red Hat. And I am going to be walking you through 4 different ways that you can deploy an application on OpenShift. So I will go ahead and share my screen. We will get to it. All right. So this is what we're going to go through. Most of this presentation is going to be live demos, but just to kind of set up what we're going to look at. So we're going to start with OC new app, which is a command line way of deploying an application. And we'll use the Openshift Web Console to deploy the very same application another way. Then we'll look at how GitHub Webhooks, the tongue twister, GitHub Webhooks can be used to automate the build and deployment when you make changes. And then finally, we'll look at ODO, which is a CLI tool specifically built for developers. But before we do that, let's quickly run through the process of what it might look like if you were going to, you have an application, you need to create and deploy an image, just the kind of standard Kubernetes way. So let's switch over to VS Code here. All right. So I have just a simple Node.js kind of front-end application that we're going to use, and we will deploy this same application every single time. We'll just give it a different name so that you can see the same process, multiple different ways that you can deploy this. So typically, if we were doing this on Kubernetes, we would need to have created a Docker file, which I've gone ahead and done here. And then you would go through kind of a standard process of Docker build, Docker run, make sure it works locally. Then if it's good, Docker push that image up to some image repository. Could be Docker Hub, it could be Array. And then I've already done that, so I will just go through the process here of running like kubectl run. So we'll copy paste so I don't have any typos. So I'm running here kubectl run. I'm passing in the name of the image. So this image happens to be on quay.io. This is our image name here, and we're using the latest tag. And then kubectl frontend is going to be what we call it. Get a deprecated message. There's this new generator flag that you can use in the future. But let's go take a look at our OpenShift Web Console and see what we've done. So this, if you haven't seen it, is the developer perspective in the OpenShift Web Console. I like it because it has this topology view, which gives me a nice visual representation of what's running in my namespace or project. So what we've deployed is this. So this is our deployment. It has one pod running. If I click into it, we could look at the pod logs if we want to. We can go into the details here. I want to quickly click into this pod so that we can see in the YAML that it is, in fact, where's our spec? And I know this is a little bit tiny. Yeah, so it's running that image that we specified. So that's all great. Now, there are more steps we'd have to take at this point. We'd need a service, we'd need to set up ingress or something like that if we were going to try to access this application, via URL from outside of the cluster. But from a kind of really basic perspective, that is how you would get code to image to running in a container on Kubernetes using kubectl. Now, what I mentioned, though, is that we're going to look at 4 different ways of doing this using OpenShift. And in each of these cases, I'll kind of explain what's happening that's different, because each of these different options for doing this saves you a little bit of the work. We glossed over the work of creating a Docker file and doing Docker build, Docker run, all of that. But you'll notice some differences when we start doing this with OCE new app, for example. So with this very same code, if I wanted to take the code from the GitHub repo, for example, which I'll show you here. I haven't actually checked in that Docker file to my repo and add in my local directory. So let's say I just had my GitHub repo, I've got my web application, but I haven't created a Docker file. Maybe I don't know how, but I want to get this app up and running. So I can use OC app for that. And here's how that works. So OC new app, and I'm already authenticated to this Kubernetes cluster. So I pass it in that GitHub URL. We'll go for typing it and see if I can do this without typos here. Concession kiosk front end. All right, and we'll call this one, we called the other one kubectl front end, we'll call this one OC new app front end so that we can distinguish it when we go to the web console. So what that's going to do is use a tool called S2I, which stands for source to image, and it can actually infer what type of language framework I'm using based off of files in the GitHub repo. So in this case, it sees there's a package.json file, and it's going to know, okay, I should use like a Node.js builder image to create this application image. So that's kind of a two-step process. If you Google for S2I or source to image, find more information about that project and how it works. But essentially, there's a base builder image, and then it uses that plus your source code to create an application image that you can run. So it does all of that kind of image creation process for you. And I spelled front end wrong, so let's go ahead and fix that before we hit enter. All right. What have I done wrong here? Done something wrong. Oh, right. That's the name. I believe I need to give it. Okay, there we go. So we get a whole bunch of output here. So it tells us, okay, I'm going to be using Node 12 here for this. It's going to give us some information about what's happening, creating resources. It says it was successful. Now we can copy and paste these commands here. This OC logs command will let us look at the build logs. BC stands for build config. So right here we can see the build happening. We missed some of the excitement as it went on here, but right now it's creating this image for us. Takes a little bit of time, but now we get push successful, which is good. Now I want to scroll back up to that output that it gave us here. So it says the application's not exposed. We can expose our services to the outside world with this command. For now, I'm going to just copy and paste this and show you what we do have over here. All right, so here's this OC new app front end. This little green check indicates that the build was successful. We've got it running. There is a service, but our service is not exposed. Now in OpenShift, there's a concept called a route, which is sort of analogous to ingress that you have in vanilla Kubernetes. Route simplifies a few things for us. So let's create a route so that we can actually pull the browser and take a look at what it is. Over here. So I've got that command, that expose command in my clipboard. We'll type it here, OC expose. We pass it in the name of that service. And what that will do is create a route for us. So it says we've got a route. Now we could get the route from the command line here, but I enjoy coming here. You can see we've got this little icon here indicating that we can open that in the browser. I will just click it. This is very exciting demo application here, which is a concession kiosk menu. We're just running the front end of it here, but you could select some items in place order. And then in the grand scheme of things, this pairs with a backend and a database, but we're just doing this component for now. So we've got that working now. This is a publicly accessible URL that's been created for this web application. And so in this case of OC new app, we did all of this without creating a Docker file, without running Docker build, any of that. The OC new app command does all of that for us, and it does it mostly through using that source to image tool. Okay, so now let's kind of do the same thing, but just completely through this web console. So there is this plus add button here. That's not really a button, menu item here. and we'll click that. So in this add menu, you have several different options. In case you can't read them on your screen, you can do this from Git. It doesn't have to be GitHub. It could be any Git repository from image. So we could have just deployed our container image directly from here, from a developer catalog, from a Docker file, straight from YAML or JSON, or you can deploy databases from the catalog. So we will go ahead and do from Git. And now, similar to what we did with OC New App, all I really need to tell it is my Git URL, where my code lives. I'll paste that in. It's going to try to auto-detect what builder image to use. Again, Node.js is correct, so I'll let that be. If for some reason you wanted a different version of Node, you can change that here. We give this an application name. I'm going to call this Web Console App, just to have, actually, what am I doing? Yes, Web Console App. And we need a name for this actual deployment that we're doing. I'm going to call this one, we'll call it Web Console Frontend, just to distinguish from the others. We have an option here. You can choose to use a standard Kubernetes deployment or a deployment config, which is something that's gives you some additional features on top of a standard deployment, or you can do a Knative service. Let's just do deployment config for now, so this will be as close as possible to what we did with OC New App. And then here, this is kind of nice. So by default, you get this box checked that says create a route to the application. So when you do this through the web console, you automatically get a route without having to go back and expose the service. But if you don't want that, you can always uncheck it. Now, if you had environment variables or labels or anything else you needed to set up as part of this deployment, those are available to you here, which is nice. You don't have to know a certain flag to add. You can just come in and, like I did, to add some environment variables, for example, I could do that here, but I don't. So we'll go ahead and click create. And it brings us back here. And now this time, let's see if we can drag this up so it's easier to see. This pod circle here has this gray ring around it. And what that's doing is that's giving us a visual representation of an application, which is really kind of just a conceptual grouping of components. That was the name we gave to it here. If we had multiple components for this application, it's kind of nice to visually group them together. And that's done using standard Kubernetes labels. That's how this application grouping is set up. So we have our deployment config. You can see that the build is running. If we wanted to, we can watch the build logs. They should look just like what we saw when we ran OC app. That's complete now. Back over here again in topology view, the build's complete, the pod is coming up, and then if all is well, good, looks like it is. We could view the pod logs here, but we can also pop that open in our browser, and it is the very same application. But that time we did it just through the web console. So we've looked at two of the ways. Now, let's say we deploy the application either via OC New App or through the web console, and we wanted to have that rebuild and redeploy every time we made a change to the Git repository. Say, I know I'm going to be doing some changes and I want to make sure those always get propagated without me having to go and like initiate the rollout myself. We can do that with GitHub Webhooks. So we'll use this one for that example. I'm going to click into here. And what I want to do is I want to go right here. I want to go to the deployment config. When I scroll down a little bit, I'm just kidding. I don't want that. I want the build. So we want this. So we want the build config. Sorry about that. All right. So down here in the build config, we have two webhook URLs. There's a generic one if you were using something like GOGS or GitLab or something. And then there's a GitHub specific one. That's what we happen to be using. So I'll click copy URL with secret. And then we'll come over to my repo. This is mine, so I can go in and change these settings. Hopefully GitHub doesn't make me authenticate, but if we go into settings here and scroll down to webhooks and delete that. I had already set one up in the past or something else. All right, so we'll add a webhook. I'm going to paste in that URL that I copied from the web console. we need to change that to application/JSON. I have a cluster that doesn't have, it doesn't like the SSL certificate chain, so I'm going to click this, even though normally you would not do this for the purposes of the demo. I'm going to do that so that we don't have issues with our verification, and then click Add Webhook. If I've done that properly, okay, good. We got the green check mark, so it looks like our webhook is good. So what should happen now? I'm going to try to do this fast enough that you get to see it. I'll click into builds here. Right now we just have one build. I'm going to make a trivial change. Let's do it. We'll do it through VS Code. I think that'll be fine. All right, so if I pull up, bring that away. Let's pull up our index file, and we'll just change the H1 tag, something trivial. So we'll call it new concession kiosk menu, and I'll save that, and we will give it a message and submit those changes, and then very fast, once I make sure it works, okay, very fast, we will come back over here, and a new build has been kicked off, so just a few seconds ago. So as soon as that GitHub push was made up to my repo, that webhook triggered and started a new build here. So that's one way that you can do a little bit of automation around your development process if you want to trigger a new version every time you make a change. So let's actually let this build complete, because we will give ourselves a test and see if this actually updates with that change, if I've done this properly. The build is running, it takes a minute or so. There you go, it's complete. Now that will kick off a new, and we'll have our deployment config, we'll bring up a new pod. And now that should be live if we go here, there. So we have our change there. So that is one way to kind of do this iterative development within your application. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at is ODO. So ODO is a command line tool. OC, I should point out, and kubectl, all three of these are command line tools you can use to interact with an OpenShift Kubernetes cluster, and all of them are totally valid and have different use cases. kubectl is great if that's what you're familiar with. OC does, you can use it as a drop-in replacement for kubectl, but it also has additional things on top of what kubectl provides, such as new apps, such as the ability to interact with projects and handle some of those more OpenShift specific things that are added on top of Kubernetes. But then ODO is built with developers in mind, particularly developers who may not be all that familiar with Kubernetes and OpenShift. So it's trying to use more developer-friendly, kind of common terminology and I can't think of the word I'm looking for, syntax basically for these commands, so that you can get your job done without having to know a ton about Kubernetes or OpenShift. So let's try that out. I think it's easier to see by just trying it. So it's clear. Just gonna make sure we're in the right place. Okay. So one other difference with ODO is that it's really helpful for doing local development, local iterative development, and pushing out those changes up to your cluster. So kind of that inner loop development. Because when I'm using ODO, I'm not building from, I mean, I can, but I'm not building from the GitHub repo. I'm building and deploying from what's actually here in my local directory. So that's one difference. So let's just try it out. So ODO has a nice listing of all the help features here if you want to see all the different commands, but there's kind of a nice shortcut command, ODO create, and this is what we'll be using. So create creates a component. ODO does have interactive mode, so if I were to just hit enter right now, it would guide me through that process. I'm not going to do that just because it will take a little longer than the time I want to spend. So we know that we want a Node.js component. I know my application is Node.js, and we need to give it a name. We'll call that ODO front end. And now I don't have to tell it anything else because it's context specific. It says it's going to use whatever is in my directory. So let's try it out. Okay, so that happened really fast, right? So what it's done there is just created the local configuration for that component. So there is, and this is more than you really need to know to use ODO. I just kind of want to explain it. So now there's this .odo directory that has local component configuration in it about what we're trying to create. Now from here, I know I'm going to want a URL, a route for my application. So just to save a little time, I'm going to do that now. ODO URL create. These are very, straightforward, obvious kind of commands. And then both of these times it told me to run ODO push. Now what that actually will do is build and deploy component on my cluster. So up until this point, everything I've done has just been local. So let's run ODO push. It's going to tell us what's happening. It gives us this kind of readout, but I'm more interested in watching it from the web console. Looks very, very similar to what you saw happening when we deployed from the web console here. So that's coming up, and we'll give it a second. It's going to, no surprise, be the same application. Now, ODO also has capabilities. I think we've got time to try this out. Capabilities to do iterative development on your local code as well, which is something I really like. Sometimes I'm not ready to push something up to GitHub. I want to make sure it's not a disaster first before I push it, and that's what I really like about ODO. So just to prove that we've got the same thing here, it's still got my my code change that I made before. Let's see. So in our local code, I can do this without messing up. So we're going to clear so we can see. There's the ODO watch command. So what watch is going to do is it's just going to sit there and listen for any changes to files within my application. I'm going to need two. Probably, no, I think we can do it without. So ODO watch, it's going to give me some information that says it's waiting for something to change. That's not what I meant to do. Sorry about that. All right, let's change something here. All right, I have my terminal big. All right, let's put this back. We'll call it extra new concession kiosk. So I'm going to save that. We should see some information here, some notes. So it kicked off a new push right away, which will build and deploy that. And then we should be able to see that over here. So without doing a commit, without doing a push to my code, it's going to be updating that for us. And so we'll be able to see it here, but it is also very easy to follow the process as it prints out there too. So let's go try it out and see if that change came through. All right, it did. So this is what I like about ODO. It allows me to do that, there's local changes in my code before I actually get to the point of pushing it up to GitHub or wherever my code lives. So we sped through that a little bit, but to kind of review what we looked at, let me switch back to the slides that we had. So we started by looking at how you would, build, test, push, and then, deploy an image to Kubernetes using kubectl run, and then 4 different ways that you can do the same thing on OpenShift where you don't have to do all the manual work yourself. So OC new app, you can do it from the command line. It'll use S2I to build and deploy that image for you. The web console, you can accomplish the same thing, but straight from the web console, and in that case, you get a route created for you by default. Webhooks isn't really another way to deploy the application so much as a way to kind of, redeploy it when there are changes. And then ODO, the one we just looked at, is the developer-friendly command line tool where you can do easy local development. So I think that brings me pretty much to the end here. I have a few links to resources if you want to learn more or dig into any of this. Learn.openshift.com is a self-paced interactive learning environment where you can do some scenarios where there's instructions and you have a terminal and you have access to the web console so that you can do a bunch of different exercises and learn. There's also an OpenShift playground there where if you just want access to an OpenShift cluster for an hour to kick the tires, that's available too. And then here's 2 really great resource pages on developers.redhat.com. One for OpenShift and one for Kubernetes, and both of those have great information if you want to learn more. All right.
Yeah.
So I will.
So actually, there was I think a couple questions that came up. So Alexander was asking and I was trying to understand his question. It was related to basically how do I deploy from a Git repo in the cloud? And I assume a Git repo in the cloud is like GitHub. Mm-hmm. That's one in the cloud. But I got the feeling he was like, okay, how do I do that? And then how do I get it to deploy maybe to multiple locations? So because you addressed the OC new app situation where you can deploy from a Git repo. By the way, Sebastian noticed that we don't have to put the Node.js tilde anymore. That's kind of cool. Yeah, that's so maybe if you could kind of go back and talk a little bit about more about S2I. I think one thing that people may have missed is the fact that these things create the image automatically also, right? Mm-hmm. That they didn't have to have the image in advance. So maybe just kind of talk about that issue one more time.
Sure. And, if I'm not quite answering the question, steer me back on track. Yes. So when we go back to this repo. So when we have code here in a Git repository, wherever it's hosted, that's when you can use something like OC new app or, the web console to have those images created for because there's no Docker file in here. I'm not deploying the image that we created before. This is just code. And in a lot of cases, this is what I do myself because I just don't like to build Docker files. But the way S2I works, and maybe I can let's see if we can pull it up, some information here. Source to image. All right. So this might be, let's see if we can get ourselves a nice new version of the docs, and I may have to find it that way. Source to image. So basically what it does is it is going to run this kind of two-step process where first it's going to either infer or you've told it, and that's the case of the tilde that we were talking to. I can't find the docs I'm looking for at the moment, so instead we will just go back where we were. So source to image is going to take your source code because you're pointing it to a location where you have a Git repository. It's going to either infer or you tell it what language you're using, and that will help it know what builder image to use. So there's a suite of builder images out there. There's one for Node. There's tons of them out there for pretty much most frameworks or languages you can think of, whether it's Java, Python, PHP, Ruby, whatever. There are builder images for all of those. And S2I knows how to take source code and a builder image for your language and create, without you having to do the Docker file, it creates that image that's runnable application image for you. Does that help clarify?
Oh, sorry. I think so, yeah, because I think that the point of no Docker file, there is no image, this gives you an image,
yes,
right? The S2I option, as well as the Odo option, as well as the, all the options you really showed there.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And then, because we also had a question about, well, what is the relationship between a pod and a container? And I think we answered that in the chat. But if you want to go back to the web console.
Yes.
And so this is a good point here. This is actually 4.4 also, I think, that question.
It is, yes.
Yeah, some new icons, yeah.
Yes, so a pod, come on, show me. Okay, so a pod can run one or more containers. Most of the time, a pod is going to run a single container, but there are cases where you could have multiple containers running in a pod. But I've drilled into this pod, and you can see a list of the containers running there. And the container is running our image, either that we built or that was built by S2I. In this case, it's the one we built.
Okay, that is fantastic. All right, and Jay Dobies was very distressed that you basically, stole his thunder for his Odo talk.
Oh no!
He's going to step up his game.
Well, I anticipate that he's probably going to show you the whole application if he's doing one on Odeo, whereas I just was kind of lazy and just showed the front end. So there's probably still a lot of excitement that he's going to show you. I just touched the surface. Odeo does a lot more than we showed.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch more things he can show. We'll have to see how he's going to up-level his game now. Okay, well, thank you so much for that, Jan. It was awesome, and I really loved that we got all this recorded. There was a large group here today asking lots of questions. I thank everyone for showing up today because, this was a great session to have to see kind of that high-level overview of what OpenShift adds on top of Kubernetes, which is a fantastic thing to go through. If you guys do have future questions, you guys can find Jan on Twitter. You can certainly email me if you remember my email. I'm the guy who emails everybody all the time. And us down, please do, and we'll happily answer your questions going forward. And then if you guys watch our DevNation upcoming, our DevNation master courses, a lot more cool stuff coming next week. Actually, Jay is going to kick off next week with a deep dive into Operator SDK. And then we also have Jafar and Eric who are going to give us a operations and admins course. So definitely check out those new courses. You'll see them on our website. They're going to really drill down to some really cool topics. Alexander, I think you're going to particularly like those sessions next week. Some real deep dives for you there. Now, thank you, Jan.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you all for being here. And at this point, we're going to be getting out of this stream and turning this thing off. Thank you all.